Yes, folks.
There we go.
Welcome to the Reckoning. I'm Matt Leck. With me, I think, is David Griscom.
I'm right here. Do you not see me?
Oh, yes, you're just frozen. Oh, you must have been on my end. Hello, David. It's good.
No
Good
worries, man. We're coming a little hot. Welcome, everybody. It's good to see you too, Matt. Matt gets ready for a big vacay. We got a big episode for y'all tonight. We're going to be doing a lot of Texas, which is very good. Obviously, it's a very important place and my home. In a little bit, we're going to be releasing a conversation that we had with Bekah down in South Texas. She is an activist who was held for 26 hours by the police on just ridiculous charges that took them a long time to even let her know that she's being charged with. And effectively, why the story is so worrying, apart from just the abuse that Bekah faced there, is that it really shows a kind of new step for Elon Musk and his moves in all these different communities that he's sort of implanted himself in, where politicians who are very much in his orbit are using the powers of the state and their own personal social media profiles to harass and intimidate activists who are speaking out about the role of SpaceX in their communities.
Yeah, you know those guys who rush to Elon's defense when you talk about like how he has segregated workplaces and stuff like that. And imagine one of those guys as the mayor of a town.
Yeah. Very, very frightening thought. And we'll be taking a deep dive into that later in the episode. And then after that, Matt and I are going to try to do a little bit of a zoom out conversation on what's going on in Ukraine. Again, complete solidarity with the people of Ukraine for a war that, is 100% at this point Putin's. But Matt and I are going to go through some of the context and some of the points that we think are worthwhile, while also visiting, some leaders and thinkers. And the arguments that they've been making about this, plus a hell of a lot more in the post game. And this weekend, there'll be a really fun think tank that we just got finished knocking out. So sign up there at patreon.com/leftreckoning for all of that. But before we get too far, I just want to ask you up front, Matt, if you had any kind of, super hot takes about Joe Biden's State of the Union last night.
So I was confessing to you earlier that I hadn't seen it before today's Majority Report, and I felt like a kid who didn't do the reading and showed up to English class. But so you get. What's interesting is, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the think tank coming up. He's not talking to the left. This is not Democratic primary.
No.
Not that Joe Biden was ever really much of a Democratic primary, like I'm going to move to the left guy. He was pretty much like counter a lot of those currents. But he's taking shots at defund and stuff like that. And it's interesting that he's still citing things that everybody wants, but that his Congress is not going to give him. And other than that, State of the Unions. I thought it was interesting that there's some like psycho Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene action, which is always good to see.
Really horrific stuff. And, I think we will definitely want to do more coverage of this, but it's worth noting that Boebert, is somebody who, she doesn't come from a very, very safe red district. Which, the fact that she really has become such a poster child of this kind of really extreme Republican politics is notable. But for me, I agree. These things are usually snooze fests. I'm always happy that we have friends who cover them in depth and are looking for the right things. I was happy to see that, he again recommitted to saying that America is not going to put troops on the ground in Ukraine. So that's positive. That being said, it was very, very much like a 5 minutes to midnight kind of talk. I think he ended the speech by saying, "Go get him," which was he tried to say, "Go get him." It wasn't really clear what got out, but there was a lot of talk about how tyranny will never defeat the light and things like that. So a little bit of a chest beating speech, but if we can avoid American entanglements there, I think that's definitely a good thing. And no reason though to to not continue watching this position, because just because Joe Biden says one thing one week doesn't mean that it's secured forever. Um, Apart from that, I mean, it's hard not to think that this upcoming 2022 midterms for the Democratic Party might be a little bit of a train wreck. There wasn't that much vision in the Biden speech. I mean, he talks about some decent policies and investing in some things. He had a good line about businesses should cut their costs instead of wages, which is fine. But without any kind of real commitment, to working class people, everyday people. I mean, it's just rhetoric, right?
Yeah.
You can't imagine too many CEOs or bosses and be like, well, the president told me to cut into my profit margin. So I'm going to do that instead of, using the power that I have to exploit people more. And I think the really, it's not sad or unexpected at this point, but it does just sort of put a pin in it for me, at least. All the talk about Union Joe, right? Joe might not be a progressive Bernie Sanders style kind of president, but he's from Scranton and he cares about these kind of bread and butter issues. As a pro union guy, I mean, you got no talk about the uptick in strikes, really historic strikes over this past year, nor was there really much going on when it comes to, except for like the most fleeting mention of the PRO Act, but as we know, that these were things that they sort of let go away with a whimper just a few months ago. So I mean, again, I didn't have high hopes or anything like that, but that's my
Yeah,
kind of political
it's
hat.
interesting to me. Like, I don't think it's like instantaneous where people are going to realize that the Democrats' ability to follow through on, let's say, want to pursue the PRO Act, they
Mm,
cannot treat it forever like the carrot that you hold in front of the donkey to keep it walking forward, right? Like, you gotta let people eat the carrot,
hmm
and it's not instantaneous. Like I said, like, I think the Democratic voters still might eat it up and be like, okay, we still got, and I think, like, good, fine. I'm not trying to turn down Democratic turnout, but I think, like, as it's not sustainable. This is when you talk about, like, leaving stuff on the table for the right. It's like, I don't
Yeah.
know.
No. I mean, it's truly a shame, and this is why it's really important for us to get involved in different avenues, because obviously the people at the top aren't too interested in it. Before we get to this conversation with Bekah, I did want to open up with a little bit of a conversation, though, about what happened here in Texas yesterday, because we had our midterm elections. And it's sort of a good, still neutral, and some bad news when it comes down to what that sort of meant for the left and the growing working class movement in Texas. First, I just want to note at the very, very top that these were high turnout for Texas historically, midterm elections, not by massive percentage points. I believe this is from Texas Tribune. The 2018 midterm primary turnout was around 17.2% of voters, while the midterm primary in 2022, that just happened yesterday, was 17.5%. So there's an uptick, but it's not a big swing. And that is also, we're talking about less than 20% of registered voters in the state of Texas showing up for these primaries. So it's always important, I think, to sort of recognize the limitations, especially for the kind of politics that we're trying to build, right? Of primaries for really measuring these things. Like, obviously, like, primaries are the first hurdle if you want to get our people, on the ballot in the general election. But it's one of those things where there's a big disconnect between, like, popular opinion on certain things and the people who end up voting in these primaries, right? And it has to be a two-track kind of understanding of how to win that. But let's start with the good. Greg Casar, who was a DSA member, was endorsed until, unfortunately, just very, very recently, over having really unfortunate positions on Palestine. And I support the decision of DSA if we're going to uphold the kind of values and the movement that we're trying to build. He had ended up asking to not be considered for an endorsement anywhere, but effectively de-endorsing him. It was a very sad moment, because I think that Greg really is a representative of a very incredible kind of pro-worker, future-facing politics that I would want to be seeing spring up all across the country. And it's sad. While I know plenty of people in the Austin DSA did incredible work on that campaign, and where they're celebrating with him last night, it's sad that we can't put that up as a strong, win for the entire movement. But that's the reality. And again, I think that it was the right decision because we have to hold strong on Palestine. But dropping all the internal DSA stuff, I mean, this is a huge victory for progressive politics, not just in Austin, but in Texas in general. And I also think for the nation. I mean, Greg, I'm very much looking forward to. It looks like that's a pretty safe district when it comes to Democrats. It looks like he will be able to win in the general. A really great victory, not only because the person we wanted to win won, and they won outright, so there's not going to be a runoff. He won and completely trounced all of his opposition. And for people who aren't familiar with internal politics in Austin, I mean, Greg is somebody who's extremely popular with working people, but as you can imagine, is the pariah of the right wing and the Republican movement here, and even a lot of kind of centrist neoliberal Democrats. So despite all those forces and people who have a lot of ammo, if they want to say, look at the scary socialists running, blah, blah, blah. Despite all that money and effort by those people, he walked away with it, which I think is a testament not only to Greg's strength as a candidate, but the incredible on the ground movement that we saw here.
Yeah.
I'll just go down the list because, the other big kind of progressive race is between Cisneros and Cuellar down in South Texas. In one of those districts that's pretty fascinating, goes all the way to San Antonio to the border. But it looks like for that, there's going to be a runoff in May. And we had sort of hoped and wanted for Cisneros, if people aren't familiar, is a very, very progressive Bernie endorsed candidate. We'd wanted her to win outright against Cuellar, who is like one of the worst blue dog Democrats, undoubtedly the most conservative of Democrats. He's very much like the poster boy of the kind of argument that in certain parts of the country, you need to run people who are anti-abortion, people who are pro fossil fuels to the detriment of our environment and our community, et cetera, right? People who it's sort of like, why do you even have this person in Congress? Because they're basically going to vote against the vast majority of the Democratic Party's platform in power, right? You would hope that would be a walk away, and it ended up being quite tight. So that's going to be a race to watch closely. But it's also like the reason this is sort of important, I think, not just for people who are following Texas politics, but also national politics, and particularly for people who consider themselves to be on the progressive side and even the socialist side, is very important because it could open up and be a very, very clear example of how we don't need to play this kind of footsie with reactionary right-wing politics to win. Cisneros is a young person who has run like a very, very, I think would be fair to say, progressive campaign on social issues. This is not somebody who's timid about talking about women's rights to abortion. This is not somebody who's timid about talking about civil and human rights for our queer brothers and sisters and friends. This is somebody who speaks a kind of language, that is sort of representative of, a kind of, a growing national culture that is taking those issues very seriously. But she merges that, and this is where I think the key is, she merges that with extremely strong pro-worker, pro-people policies. I like Jessica. I support her, and I urge people to vote for her. She's not, for example, all the way on our side of being, a quote unquote, democratic socialist, dyed in the wool person, but certainly represents, a kind of extension of a Bernie Sanders and even Elizabeth Warren, movement within the Democratic Party that I think is a positive one. So we'll be watching that race very closely, and it's worth noting too. Sorry. I just wanted to know.
I got a clip from Joy Reid.
Why don't you play that, and I can say some things after.
Yeah, this is their reaction here, which I thought was kind of in line with what you were saying.
I want to start with Julian Castro, because I am fascinated by the Cisneros versus Cuellar race. And so I guess the question, given all that has happened around the issue of abortion in the state of Texas, do you have a sense of whether that issue motivated progressive voters to come out for Cisneros? And if you think that is the case, what do you think that says about the strength of that issue and how it might play in the general?
Well, I think it did, Joy. And I mean, there are a couple of ironies here. One is that one, right? She has been very unabashedly pro-choice. She made abortion an issue in this campaign, pointed out that Representative Cuellar is the only anti-abortion Democrat in the entire Democratic caucus in the House of Representatives. So she didn't shy away from it. That's one thing. The other is there's been so much attention focused since the November 2020 election, since Donald Trump did a little bit better in South Texas than folks were expecting. So much attention focused on a perceived rightward shift in the South Texas counties that the 28th congressional district includes. And yet, at the same time, both in 2020, Jessica Cisneros did very well, coming in within 4 points of, at that point, an 8-term incumbent. And now she's actually leading and could possibly win without a runoff against this 9-term incumbent, who is probably the most conservative Democrat in the caucus at this point. You know, people may say that South Texas is going one way, but the results tonight, at least in the 28th congressional district, seem to suggest that there is life for progressives there, and they have to be happy.
Yeah, and
What do you make of that?
know, well, I'll just say one thing. You know, that's an older clip, so it ends up that you know there's going to be a runoff. Once most of the votes that were sort of brought in South Texas, closer to those border regions versus in the San Antonio areas in the district, Cuellar was able to to make up some ground. But what do I make of that? I mean, I think that for the most part, I agree with Castro there. That there certainly is a lot of life for progressive politics there, particularly politics that really speak in a real way, to people's issues. I mean, like when I'm saying, for example, that Jessica is showing up, for working people and working class people's issues, we're not just talking about somebody who is, putting on a blue Oxford shirt and rolling up their sleeves. I mean, like really talking about the anxieties that people have over healthcare and wages and the inequality in our society. I think that I think that it's worthwhile, and I think that people should take the shift that they have seen in South Texas very seriously. And I think that the argument that the progressive left should be making is not to ignore the fact that there has been a kind of inroads made with the GOP, but to actually say that we have a story, we have a movement that has also very much been sort of underrepresented in elected officials from that region, and that we can pull those people away much easier than because what the Democrats when you see people, it's funny because I talk about South Texas and the shift a lot because I think it really does show a kind of failure of the state Democratic Party here, thinking that they're just always going to get votes from Tejanos and Hispanic people in South Texas, right? We're seeing that that's not necessarily the case. And again, for people who aren't familiar, we're not talking about massive shifts in the sense that like some of these districts were necessarily flipping over to Trump. It was just that Trump was able to pick up support, and you have seen
in those margins. I'm getting in those margins.
And that's like that's ridiculous. I mean, that's Donald Trump, right? He shouldn't be able to get in there at all. But what I'm saying is that so I talk about the slux. I think it is something worrying. I think people should pay attention to it. But what you will end up getting from a lot of people who are very much established in the Democratic Party is this kind of this is why we need to run super right-wing Democrats down there. Exactly, and I'm going to tell you right now that that is a disaster. Like it might even help you out in one election cycle or two as things maybe transfer. But you put yourself effectively you're hampering you're hurting your ability to be able to enact any kind of progressive legislation in office. And two, you're only sort of prolonging something that's inevitable because sooner or later people are say like, well, why am I getting the half-assed Republican when we can get the full one, right? What we have to be able, what we have to be able to do is to not encourage those kind of shifts, but rather put forward a much better vision that brings in all of those voters in a progressive direction. Anyways, I think that Cisneros certainly represents, that shift. And I think that that's the lesson that people should take, because if the lesson they take is that, oh, we've seen some movement in polling and things like that, so we need to basically get more conservative. I mean, that's a disaster, especially at
Yeah.
a time when the state, like if you get the Democratic Party going more conservative while the GOP is just going completely off the rails. I mean, that's a death sentence for people, frankly. And I don't mean to use hyperbole, but it is when you're talking about the abuse that people are facing when it comes to the right to abortion, comes to the abuse that people are facing because of, trans issues here, the abuse that people are facing when it comes to major corporations coming in and taking advantage of folks and decimating communities, the abuse that we're facing right now because people like Greg Abbott and the state party GOP want to continue to enrich their friends at the expense of our ability to have electricity during storms, right? Like it is life and death kind of stuff. I think that it is important.
Yeah, and like the idea that Trump was popular with folks just because of the conservatism is such a jump, I think. Like
Mm.
like Trump was simultaneously more conservative and more libertarian than all the candidates, right? Like he spoke to everyone. We're not going to leave people in the street. To simultaneously, like there has to be some sort of punishment for abortion, right? Like the idea, but I think like all people got, they don't have a sense of like where on the scale are you left and right. They're saying, are you going to say like I don't give a fuck who Marco Rubio and Jeb Bush is and look like you have big balls? That's why Trump won. Like I think fundamentally, but anyway.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there, and if people wanted to get my fresh, reaction to that in 2020, you could go on Jacobin, called "Socialism Can Win in Texas." I didn't pick the title, but that's what it was called. Not that I don't disagree with that necessarily, but you can go find that, and I have some sort of hot takes on as to what happened with Trump there. But before we get to this interview, I did want to also mention because we had them on the show, and they were two campaigns that I highly supported, both Andrew Harrison and Bob Leibel. Here in the Austin area, unfortunately, were not successful. I think the campaigns they ran were incredibly visionary. The mobilization for that level of office was incredible, and I'm hoping that we're able to pick that up. In the future. I will just say that what are the lessons there? I can't do too much. Armchair quarterbacking of those because I think that the effort that was put forward was very serious and the hurdles and challenges that people had to face were immense. I think the big things for people who were sort of watching from the outside was that internally the kind of party apparatus and also just kind of like social organizations, including like organizations like the Austin Chronicle, didn't give out the endorsements to Bob or Andrew, which is a joke, and we can roast them for that. But unfortunately, like the way that most people vote on these in these primaries is they rely on those a lot. So that's obviously that's difficult, and you can't blame the campaigns for not getting those. And two, I think that this is just something that for people here is just like there is, particularly with Bob's race versus Bridget Shea, there really is a fissure going on between people who consider themselves to be liberals here, between people like us who are advocating for more pro-worker policies, being more serious about corporate power, and things like that, and a kind of traditional liberal base. I'm from Austin, right? And I talked to and I grew up primarily with liberal family members and things like that. And I even though people are working class, right? You talk to them, say, look, who should I support in this election or that election? And I'll say like, here's a list. I sent them something, and then I'll get a message back being like, well, why are you against this person? They're my friend. I've known them for 30 years, right? Like there is a kind of established liberal base here in Austin that shows up for these primary elections. As we were saying, these were historically high, but they're still low when you look at the percentage that those people show up for these elections. And like, that's a difficult bridge, for us to find ways to turn people who are interested in our policies into active voters to our policies. Cause I can tell you this right now, right? If the people who are living in the districts where Andrew was running and the districts where Bob were running, for example, had watched the conversations that we had here on Left Reckoning with those candidates, I can promise you people would have been, people would have been open and wanting those ideas to be successful. The problem is turning people who are interested in these ideas into voters. And obviously this is ground game. This is organizing. This is all this kind of stuff. This is not a criticism of the campaign. It's just recognizing that, like, there's always a kind of, I don't know, push sometimes after we lose an election to say, like, well, we needed to do like this kind of messaging, or like, oh, we went too far in this or that, right? Instead of the realization that, like, overcoming these fucking really entrenched machines is hard, and turning situations where we have low participation in our democracy into high participation takes time. We can't use those as excuses, but we should also, like, try to draw the right lessons instead of, scrapping the playbook. And I'm not saying this, I don't think anybody involved is thinking that. I'm just, we covered this on our show, so I figured I might as well just sort of tell people how I'm feeling about it on the other side. I hope, both of them run again, in the near future, in the next cycle. From Andrew's, like, reimagining of using these kind of justice positions to create a much more humane system. I think that that's something that is not only viable, but is actually really important. To Bob taking very, very seriously the responsibility of the Travis County Commission to look out for working people instead of giving fucking millions of dollars to people like Elon Musk, who we'll be talking about in a couple of minutes. I'm very, very proud of those campaigns that they run, and I'm hoping that there's more and much more of that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most positive way to look at it, in a way that I don't think is entirely, like, lacking in substance, is you have to build institutional knowledge with how this stuff is, and, like, this sort of, I think we're seeing a rise in awareness and the type of candidates we are getting, and they aren't going to win the first time. My buddy Chris Leal ran in State House District 114, lost. But, like, at the same time, he lost to the person who got the Dallas Morning News endorsement, but he went through and built connections with the AFT. Like, he got a whole bunch of union endorsements and that sort of stuff. And you run again, a couple of years, and you see what happens. And hopefully, like, you build up to the point where you can put, even if a candidate does beat you, you put them on the record about something that, if they cross it, then it can become a future rallying point, a future point of criticism and education. So I think it is. I mean, I'm glad we got some decent progressives, and keep the ball rolling.
Yep. And, like, the thing is, like, beyond everything though, like, progressive politics and left politics in Texas is alive and well. And, with each challenge, we only get stronger, and our numbers only grow. So I'm really, really looking forward to that. Just wanted to note again, for folks, please consider subscribing to the show at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We got our post game coming up immediately after this. So all these people who got questions and things like that in the chat, sign up. You can ask us in the Discord. You can leave us a voicemail as well. We'll answer those in the post game. We're going to be talking a little bit to sort of triple down on the Texas theme of the night. I'm going to show Matt some Greg Abbott versus Robert O'Rourke videos that have come out now that those are the two people running for governor here, to get his opinions on it. A lot more fun stuff. So please consider joining at patreon.com/leftreckoning. Last week, we released our conversation with Mark Kruger about St. Louis and the St. Louis Commune, which is an absolutely fascinating moment in American history, where in the midst of a general strike, workers and communists got together and overtook the city of St. Louis. And they ran it, including, offering to run the mail system, all of these basic kind of civil services. It's a really fascinating time.
That part where they ran the mail because it's a train strike, and they kept the mail running because otherwise it would give the government a reason to come in and, put them down. And of course, ultimately, like, the violence of the dictatorial bourgeoisie put the commune down. But yeah,
and they started the weird the march, what people.
Yes, I forgot to emphasize this. The thing that Ellie Kemper got in trouble for, the what is it called,
the Veiled Prophet.
Veiled Prophet.
It's this organization which has like a big thing. They started that up. So the communists in 1877, and that organization starts in 1878 to basically intimidate and remind the working class of St. Louis that the rich and powerful are in control of that society. So really interesting
Yeah.
history there.
And this didn't come up in the interview, I don't think, but I think I remember from the book, which is that one of the conditions when they were negotiating was they were going to stop doing giant, like, sort of street parade actions. And it's just interesting, sort of, I don't know, like that was a huge threat. So the veiled prophet became like a substitution for that. Okay. Like, you guys had these worker parades during the commune. We're going to get our own weird fucking mythological kingdom that looks a lot like the Klan. And I mean, is like a cousin basically, and show who actually runs the streets for the next century. And like, it's insane. Yeah. Like, and this stuff, I mean, I'm going on a little bit too much, but the Ellie Kemper thing is so instructive, right? Like, as far of like how this stuff gets ingrained in society and becomes sort of a background of like sort of aristocracy, white aristocracy in this case too. But anyway, check out that interview, patreon.com/Left Reckoning. Also, we are closing in on 20,000 subscriptions on YouTube. So if you're not subbed, I mean, what are you doing? Go do it.
Yeah.
Veiled prophet, not male prophet. Veiled as in like wearing a veil. Yeah.
Yeah, please do. And also, just a reminder, we're going to jump to the interview right now, talking about SpaceX's colonization of South Texas. But just a reminder for people who are on YouTube, you can listen to the reasons why you should do this in the interview coming up. But we have links in the show notes. One, to donate to Bekah's defense fund, and two, to sign a petition to have the city drop the charges against her, and for the mayor to be investigated for abuse of power, which is a right step in my opinion. So I highly suggest y'all check that out and click those links as well. But without further ado, let's get to this interview.
See you, folks.
Welcome back, everybody, to Left Reckoning. David Griscom here, joined as always by Matt Leck.
Yo.
We have a very important story to get to today. We're going to shed some light on what's been happening in Brownsville, Texas, surrounding SpaceX, some really, really egregious overreach by the local government there. But before we get to all of that, I'd like to introduce our guest. Rebekah Hinojosa is a community organizer and environmental activist out of Brownsville, Texas. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm really happy that you're able to speak to us. And I'm sorry, and I hope that you're able to recover after this really egregious event that happened, down in Brownsville, Texas. Could you just take people through what happened on February 16th to you?
Sure. Well, I was, at home. It was the morning. I was in my pajamas still, and I hear a loud knock on the door of my apartment. And I think, oh, it's just package delivery. I order a lot of packages, and I see just a swarm of men, through the peephole, and they're loud. They're still knocking pretty loudly. And I open the door a crack, and they tell me it's Brownsville Police Department. And, they won't tell me what it's about. And I ask them for a warrant, and they just put the door open, and immediately they're in my apartment. They grab me, put my hands behind my back, and I beg them, let me get dressed. I'm in my pajamas, please. And they're still holding on to me. They won't let me go. And I see my shoes pretty nearby me in the living room, and I try to, edge my body towards my shoes so I can at least put my shoes on. And I'm like, please let me put my shoes on. And the police officer says, we're going to charge you with resisting arrest if you try to grab your shoes. So at that point, I just stop. I stop moving. I don't know what what they're planning to charge me with. I don't know what this is about. Another police officer comes into my apartment, and I beg him. I was like, please just grab my shoes for me, please, so I can put them on. Just grab them. And he finally picks up my shoes. So I'm barefoot. I'm in my very thin pajamas. All I have are my glasses on my face. They put me in handcuffs, and take me to the police car, and I see about, I think it's 4 officers, maybe even more. I see 2 officers looking into the windows of my car. I see another one still standing next to my front door, which is open, which means that, the police had full access to my apartment. I live alone. There was no one else there. I was worried about my cat, who was inside by himself. And they put me in the back of the police car, and then they take me downtown to the police department and put me in city jail. They take my mugshot, my fingerprints, and a female guard puts me in the cell, and then she asks me to turn around, and she pulls my glasses off my face and tells me, "You don't need to read anything in there."
Oh my God.
And my vision is terrible. Like I need glasses to do anything, to brush my teeth. I can't even read like the police department, like the police officers' name tags. I don't even know who I'm talking to in the police department. So I'm just sitting there with really impaired vision in my thin pajamas in a cold jail cell by myself. And no one knows I'm there. None of my friends or family. And then, I finally get my one free phone call. I call my dad. I tell my dad to call my other family members, let them know I'm in jail, try to get me out.
At this point, had you at this point had you been told anything about what they were charging you with, or were you still completely in the dark?
Well, they had two detectives interrogate me in a conference room in the police department. And they, at that point, tell me that I'm being charged with a Class B misdemeanor for graffiti. And they're trying to show me pictures and documents. They're trying to get me to sign a document, and I can't see anything because they won't give me back my glasses for this interrogation. And I tell him, "Sir, I can't see what you're saying." And at this point, I'm feeling kind of dizzy, just from straining to see. And the detective, Go ahead. And the detective starts to tell me, "I know you're part of organizations, and how do you think your job is going to feel about this?"
Jesus Christ.
Yeah, and I just want to note here that that's not the typical for any sort of incident like that. You don't see cops going and frog marching people out of their apartments. Typically, it's a citation. This is the sort of thing you hear about in Singapore or something like that, right? But that's just a technical note about these things in general.
Right.
And how long were you held there?
Roughly 26 hours. So I had to spend the night in jail, which I didn't sleep at all. I was just on, very alert. It was too cold to sleep in there. There was bright fluorescent lights. They never dimmed the lights. And I was just terrified of even the thought of sleeping in jail. Police, there's a history of police brutality along the border. I don't feel comfortable going to sleep.
Yeah, and they've already been aggressive in removing your glasses. Like that's such attack. Maybe that's a common thing in police departments. If so, it's commonplace abuse. That's horrible.
And and this story would be horrific enough on its own. But when you're let out, you come to find that the mayor has been paying quite a bit of attention to you and to this again, alleged graffiti.
Right. So I finally get out of jail. I get a ride from my cousin. I get back to my apartment. I didn't even know if my apartment door was locked or wide open. Yeah. Luckily, my cousin had a spare, and I told her to bring the spare key just in case. And luckily, I had food and everything, already there in the apartment for my cat, so I knew he was okay. So I get home, and I'm in my pajamas, covered in jail dirt that I couldn't even see in the cell because I couldn't see anything. And then, I started getting all these text messages, missed calls on my phone, looking at my phone. And then a friend texts me that the mayor has publicly announced my arrest on his official social media platform. And he posts my job. And in the posting on Facebook, he says he went to LinkedIn and found my job. And he also posts that I'm frequently quoted as being anti-SpaceX in articles. And this is still alleged, right? I haven't had to plea. And he's already, he's doxing me.
No, I mean, this is just extra. I mean, this is extraordinary too. First of all, one for a mayor in almost any kind of case, first like of this level, Class B misdemeanor, but pretty much any kind of case where the police department is already involved, for the mayor to be publicly commenting on something like this is absolutely ridiculous. And on top of it, acting as if you having an opinion about a very, very major political and economic factor in your community somehow, implies some level of like guilt or wickedness on your part. I mean, it's really egregious.
Exactly. Immediately, like people just start commenting, saying, why are you posting her job on here? There were some reporters who have scrolled back through his Facebook like the last 2 years, and he's never posted anyone else's mugshot or personal information of anyone else that's been arrested in the city of Brownsville. So I was very clearly singled out and targeted by the mayor because he is, in the pocket of SpaceX and wants to quash SpaceX dissent.
I mean, that's such a scary element to this is it's coordination, right? There's an intelligence operation to this where that detective comes in and like talks about your associations with activist groups, right? Like they have some kind of intelligence apparatus going on with SpaceX. That's what this looks like to me.
Yeah, let's just share this really quick so everyone can be on the same page now. People should definitely read this piece in Texas Observer by Gus Bova, who interviewed and talked with Bekah about this. If you see here, here's a picture of the mural and this, bit of writing on it that got the police department and the mayor all worked up here, which I believe has now been painted over. I mean, it was painted over in the matter of, hours or days. People should spend some time reading, that piece for the full, breakdown of the case here. But, this reaction from the state, and that's what it is, right? This is the government using like the police, which are the armed agents of the state, to harass people, to publicly, condemn and get worked up about something that is like, frankly, like a pretty non-factor amount of like graffiti or something like that in the first place is ridiculous. But this mural, right, is it's a public, it's on a publicly owned building, is it not?
So this is city property. The mural is, Elon Musk Foundation money that was given to the city of Brownsville to paint 3 murals in town. 2 of them have been painted. This was the first one that was painted. There's been cry about this mural for months. People have been refer to it as a gentrified eyesore.
I would agree with that categorization, frankly.
Yeah. Well, like a soulless use of art, just like a company's foundation comes in to like like BTX, I assume means Brownsville, Texas.
No one calls Brownsville BTX.
They call Austin ATX,
very
right?
Intentional.
Yeah.
Right. So it's very intentional rebranding of Brownsville, of downtown Brownsville, to attract SpaceX employees and tourists. The mayor has posted on his own Instagram that this mural is not for the community. It's to appeal to SpaceX people.
So let's zoom out here, and we'll come back to talk about the mayor and the case a little bit towards the end. But like, this is all happening in a very specific context in Brownsville. And people who watch the show are familiar. Matt and I cover a lot of what Elon Musk has been up to. We spent a whole episode last week talking about this really horrific lawsuit against him and his company for just extreme racism is the only way really to categorize it. And if it was only that this person was sort of like an annoying media figure, that'd be one thing. But this is actually starting to step into the area of actually harming communities, displacing people. And in this case right here, I mean, we don't know what these kind of behind the scenes relationships are like, but there certainly is a kind of feeling, at least from the government and the current mayor of Brownsville, that any kind of public criticism of SpaceX is not only unwelcome by the government there, but they're going to pursue and try to make examples of people who are involved in it. I mean, Bekah, could you help people understand sort of SpaceX and its relationship to Brownsville? What this move has meant for people in the city, how the community feels about it. And we can get into some other facts that I have, I brought with me later.
I mean, our rent in Brownsville is going up. Everyone I know in Brownsville in the last year has seen their rent go up pretty high. And real estate companies here, real estate agents, all of their listings for this region, they post perfect for a SpaceX employee. So it's very clear who they want to prioritize moving into this area. There was a gentleman with like a real estate association in South Padre Island who says there's pretty much no property or houses for people to buy, and most of them have been bought up by SpaceX employees. So we're just seeing a rapid change to our coastline because of SpaceX, from within the last 2 to 3 years, just rent go up, explosions happening.
Yeah, could you talk about Starbase for us?
Yeah, Starbase. Sure. There we go.
I mean, SpaceX, just in a matter of 3 years, is rapidly expanding, and Elon Musk is trying to incorporate Brownsville's beach to create his own billionaire city called Starbase, Texas. And this is the poor people's beach. This is where local people from our community, brown people, indigenous people, people of color, go to fish, to feed their families, to go and recreate, and not have to worry about paying high fees like they would at, say, South Padre Island. This, for many people, like, this is our vacation, is going to our own coastline. That's a vacation for many of our families.
And the thing is that I mean, could you paint a picture for people of what Brownsville's like, the people who have been in Brownsville for a while, the working people there? Because one thing that's really notable about SpaceX and a lot of not just Musk's companies, but a lot of these big tech companies that are moving into communities, they promise a lot of jobs for folks. But really what that ends up meaning is that there's just mass displacement, and like maybe there are jobs for people, but they're people who weren't living in that community, a year ago, 2 years ago. They're people who are being, brought in from California, wherever else. Could you give people an understanding of, what the kind of community in Brownsville is like?
SpaceX is giving us the same broken promise, claiming that they'll bring jobs to local people, which is quickly, disproven. Elon Musk went on his own social media platform on Twitter and told people, please move to Brownsville and South Padre Island and work for SpaceX. So clearly he wants, outsiders to come here, that, these aren't going to employment for local people. And then when you look at the fine print of, the permit applications, the license applications SpaceX submits to, the FAA, it says in there, 450 new jobs for the SpaceX expansion. But, those jobs are for this income, and, a majority income level in Brownsville and the Rio Grande Valley region is not that income level. So very clearly, like, jobs aren't for our people. And then we need to talk about what good jobs looks like, right? An industry that's damaging our coastline, that is trying to actually drill for gas on the beach for rocket fuel. that is exploding rocket parts into like the South Padre Island jetties and into our communities and displacing people from the beach in their homes. That doesn't sound like good jobs, or even definitely not unionized jobs.
Certainly that, and also, I mean, there's a kind of lack of care for the community, the people, and the environment. Let me, let me read a quote from Elon Musk to just remind people what this guy thinks about Brownsville. In 2018, describing Brownsville in an interview with Esquire, Musk said, "We've got a lot of land with nobody around, and so if a rocket blows up, it's cool." I mean, would you agree with that kind of description of Brownsville and the beaches around you?
Absolutely not. And in fact, I would call that racist to say that our people don't even count as people, that we're not there in his eyes, and that it's okay to blow things up. It's not okay.
Yeah, and and again, people we've done some deeper dives into some of the things that have been going on with SpaceX, but could you describe for people too that there's the economic and displacement aspect of this, and then there's the environmental aspect, and then there's the safety one, right? And that's one that I would imagine, just as a member of a community or democracy, and at least in name, should be something that's a major concern for people. But he was able to carve out protections for himself, if I recall correctly. So that they could shut down state parks, state beaches, so that he could do rocket launches, and basically people are sort of told that they, can't be out in certain areas where people tend to frequent, until Elon Musk and his friends, get finished blowing shit up in the air. Right.
So Boca Chica Beach was never for sale. It is a state park. That is wildlife refuge. The community should have access to the beach. Politicians here are actively selling a beach that was never for sale. And our former state rep, Renee Olivera, was the one that pushed that bill through the Texas State Ledge to allow SpaceX to excessively close the beach. And he, got voted out of office, and conveniently was an attorney representing SpaceX in one of the lawsuits against a family that suffered a fatal car accident because of SpaceX. So, just the revolving doors of, a politician who pushed something for SpaceX and is now profiting from SpaceX.
Mm. Well, I mean, because this is the kind of reality here, and this is my opinion, but certainly I can imagine that the mayor of Brownsville sort of wants to participate in those kind of relationships, right? There's a kind of willingness to open up and give special exception for this person and this company in ways that aren't really beneficial to the community, but certainly might be able to make a lot of money for SpaceX and those around Elon Musk.
Yeah, absolutely. Brownsville has made so many partnerships with space industry companies just in the last 2 years, like 4 or 5. Local community members have submitted public info requests, and the city has fought really hard to block all of those info requests. So there's just little to no transparency of what kind of space partnerships that the city is pushing for, really making. So, Mayor Mendez even went so far as to change the city's tagline from on the border by the sea to on the border by the sea and beyond. So, he's really pushing space rebranding for our city fast between these partnerships, between murals downtown, and changing the city's tagline.
Can you talk a little bit about as an active or as a community organizer, what the morale is like in the face of all this, and also touch on a little bit, how you personally are dealing with basically like a show of force by the police department and mayor.
Yeah, local people are speaking up. There's right now some conservation groups that are demanding a full EIS, a full environmental impact study of all the impacts we face from SpaceX. There's an active lawsuit against the county and the Texas GLO around the excessive beach closures. I mean, people have been speaking out to news media for years. We've been demanding town halls from the city. People have been making public comments, and they've just been flat out ignored. So, it doesn't surprise me that someone or several people or whoever, went and, wrote their message beneath that BTX mural. I mean, maybe they see it as a giant public comment form message that the city and county officials will finally read and respond to.
It seems to be the only thing they'll be paying attention to. Yeah.
But it does make speaking out against SpaceX is clearly making it difficult to be a member of this community.
Right.
I
haven't seen this kind of level of mayoral capture. Like, I'm sure it happens, but like it just seems so egregious. Going on Facebook and all the other things behind it. It's really horrible. Can you tell us a little bit more about this mayor? Is there anything like, what's his history been like? What's he besides just a Musk henchman?
Oh, he loves posting selfies of him with Elon Musk. You can find him on his Instagram profile. He'll post Instagram status updates about how he's meeting with the Musk Foundation. He loves SpaceX. There's another city commissioner here who tweets at Elon Musk about how much he loves him. They really go out there to basically be social media editors for Elon Musk SpaceX. They drive Teslas. He promotes Tesla charging stations in the community. And the mayor, his day job is he's an attorney, and he also owns a pizza place downtown. Sorry, I think I forgot part of your question.
No, I think that's good enough. I was just curious, what else is going on in this guy's life that he can be so enthusiastic about Tesla or SpaceX. He sounds like the people that get in our comment sections, except he has
he has power, which is worrying.
Yeah. And he made that initial post with my mugshot and my job, and saying that I'm anti-SpaceX, publicly announcing my arrest. And then he did a follow-up Facebook post just this past Wednesday where he says that he's investigating my arrest and that he'll support, any findings. Because I went public with how violently arrested, the violent arrest I experienced. And now he's claiming that he'll investigate this arrest. But also he refuses to drop the charge.
So, on that, there's some public calls to get these charges dropped. Can we direct people to any of those here?
Yeah, absolutely. I have a petition urging people that people can sign, urging the city of Brownsville to drop the charge and also to investigate Mayor Mendez for abuse of power.
Yes.
Absolutely.
I also have an online fundraiser if anyone wants to donate to my legal fees. Mike Siegel is my pro bono attorney, but I also have another attorney and other legal fees that I need to cover.
Well, absolutely. We'll keep those in the show notes below so people can find them. And I know that this has been a really shocking time, and I just have to commend you in your bravery and standing up against both of these forces. As we sort of close, would you mind just sort of letting us people know, particularly people who might be in the region and the area, how members of your community and the activist base have sort of been, organizing around this, and are there any kind of plans to sort of, use this moment and what is sort of brought to light, to sort of further draw attention to the kind of abuses of SpaceX and this massive gentrification project in Brownsville?
Yeah, it's daunting that we're, our community, which is one of the poorest ones in the country, is facing literally the richest on the earth, and one of the richest, wealthiest companies, and in his favor and in his pocket. It's daunting. We're working in a coalition together. Speaking out to the Federal Aviation Administration, speaking out to any regulatory agency involved with SpaceX. There's also a tribe here called the Carrizo Comacrudo tribe that's been speaking about sacred lands and sacred sites, facing destruction from SpaceX and other industry trying to move into our area. We're working hard, and we're building a movement. And people are actively calling out Mayor Mendez for his obvious abuse of power. Some of his 2 posts about me have like hundreds of comments. A lot of people who are upset about the mural, upset about the mayor and the police department's obvious abuse towards me. We're doing all we can, the community.
Well, Bekah, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. We'll put the links to how people can help out with legal fees and sign the petition to show these folks that we are all watching, and we can't allow these kind of forces to take over and displace people out of their communities and their homes. And I'm really honored to be able to share a platform with you today, and thank you for all your work and onward.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
It was really great to be able to speak with her. And again, folks, in the show notes below, I also think we put in the chat too, there are ways for you to participate in the fundraiser and to put your name on that petition, because this is a pretty extreme escalation of the assault of not just Musk, but these very, very powerful, politically engaged billionaires, targeting activists and entire communities, basically because they think they can get away with it. So this is a great opportunity to show them that they can't. Matt, you're muted.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, like, this stuff happens a lot. Like, and I think, and it needs to be guarded against closely, because when I say it happens a lot, like historically, this is a big function of American governments, is this sort of like of because and it's necessary at times when you have worker power, and you need and like just the Gilded Ageness of it, right? Like Musk marauders into town and he's got just a fanboy as a mayor. It's really upside down structure as far as I'm concerned. He's the capitalist, and I don't know.
No, unbelievable. I mean, it's truly unbelievable. And like, as I noted in the interview, I mean, this is not the worst of Musk's crimes, but even just the way that he talks about a place like Brownsville is just so despicable to me. To sit there and say like, "Oh, I want to be a part of your community. Like, please, why don't you put up these?" Again, we don't know exactly what conversations are happening, but the mayor's putting up big ass murals for you, and basically doing free media for you to try to celebrate
not only
you
free
joining
media.
the community.
Sorry, but like they're also doing like media, like intelligence collection. Like who's saying what about fucking Elon Musk? That's crazy that's happening. And I look forward to documents, if any, get released on the types of coordination that was going on there.
Well, I mean, but like, he's getting all this stuff from the city, one, plundering their resources and their land, and then saying, yeah, it's great because if I blow shit up, like there's nobody there, nobody cares, right? Yeah. Which is just such a nasty viewpoint, but it is, that it is very much endemic to, the way Musk treats places. And it's a reminder, not just in the case of Musk, but particularly with him, that if you ever start getting news that, oh, this boy might be coming to town, and your local officials are starting to cook up a really nice tax incentive package, you need to shut that shit down, because when he comes, things get much, much worse. And for people who might have only seen this, I highly suggest you check out our video last week
Yeah.
where we broke down this very serious, you know, chapter of extreme racism. I don't know if that's like the best framing. It's just the only way I can feel I can probably categorize just how nasty this stuff is at the Tesla facilities in California, right? I mean, like, this is somebody whose name is like has gone. I mean, I say this all the time, but like, if only he was just a character, a kind of pop culture figure who like, oh, I don't like him, right? But he's actually actively is like moving into this very, very dangerous and active role in harming the environment and communities and animals and etc.
Yeah. Oh, there's one other point I wanted to make. Oh yeah, the whole like Starlink thing. Did you see that with
Well, we can use that as a segue if you want.
Yeah. So my understanding is he's offering this, and I'll be honest, I wasn't up on Starlink, but somebody commented earlier that Starlink looks like it solves the problem of no internet on super yachts, and like he's using this horrible like invasion to sell himself again, to make fucking headlines.
So for people who aren't familiar, Musk does a typical kind of Musk thing here, where we're reading and seeing these horrifying, images and tellings of what's going on in Ukraine, and I believe a Ukrainian like government official or somebody of some notoriety tweeted at him like, why don't you help us out, before we colonize Mars or something like that. And Musk in his typical kind of cadence is like, Starlink is now up, and is active in Ukraine. And then, of course, there is this incredible, very put on applause from the U.S. media. Oh my God, Musk's coming to the rescue, saving the day again. And it turns out, again, for people who aren't familiar with Starlink, effectively what it is it's satellite internet. So, you don't need the same kind of infrastructure as, traditional internet, but you still do need what they call terminals, which are essentially like modems, right? To access it. So it's not like Musk just turned on, flipped the switch, and then all of Ukraine now has access to Wi-Fi and internet. You need to have these terminals, which typically cost around $500, as Matt was saying a second ago about who the clientele for this thing might be. But I think they're going to offer them at a lower rate for people who need it. Thank you, Musk. And they're going to ship a box of some of these terminals to Ukraine, which, just on the practical level, it is, if that helps some people, I'm happy for it. Right. But there's a big disconnect between what the reality is and how he wants to present himself. Right. Because the actual reality is like, okay, so there are some boxes of terminals in transit to some location in Ukraine, a country right now, whereas as we're seeing, some of the first cities in the south, southern Ukraine, as of recording, have fallen. Kiev seems like it's, almost completely encircled, right? Like the idea that, shipping is sort of functioning in a normal way, right? Like even drop the war, like the idea of like being able to distribute the amount of terminals and things that you would need to actually have this help, large segments of the population, just logistically it's impossible, let alone in a period of time when, the madman Putin has like, completely, encircled the country and is actively bombing and invading it. Right. And again, like the point here is not that we're trying to nitpick because somebody tried to do something that like wasn't perfect. The point that we're trying to nitpick is that this guy has made a career out of promising things in big, whenever the world's attention is on a certain, subject or part of the world, Musk jumps in with some kind of completely outlandish solution to it. And then there's a lot of like positive press that he gets in response to this. And then when you actually look into like what it ended up being on the ground, it's nowhere near as glorious and magnificent as what was promised in the first place.
Yeah. I mean, it's like if Zelensky says the wrong thing about Starlink, is he going to get called a pedo guy on Twitter?
Yeah. Which is what Musk, for people who don't know, that's what Musk did in in South Asia when those boys were stuck in those caves for a prolonged period of time. Musk, without being asked by fucking anybody, designed
A
some.
Twitter user asked him. A Twitter
Oh, a
user
Twitter
asked him, and
user.
he responded to it. This is the same thing. Stop tweeting
Yeah.
at Elon Musk for help is another
Donkey
point.
Kong 69 asks Elon Musk to like build a submarine for these kids, and he did. And he sent it to them, and it was not usable. Uh, for it was not proper. It was not something that was going to be able to help them in the rescue of these children. And Musk then started alleging that the rescue team that did save these children were pedophiles. I mean, anyway,
By the way, just an update on that.
Yeah.
He won that lawsuit. So you can call. If you wonder, it'd be interesting to see how this precedent, if it's the other way around, and you're insulting a famous person, and not a famous person insulting a relative nobody. But Elon Musk got off on that, which means that you can basically call anyone a pedo, and that's free speech. Which okay, I guess I'm somewhat in support of that.
Well, the difference, though, Matt, is that you're not a rich guy with millions and millions of dollars.
That's the thing. It's like I would love
privileges.
Yeah.
Some are more equal than others in American democracy, right? We learned that in our legal system, unfortunately. Which, by the way, is a good reason to go and help out Bekah in her fight against these people, because making sure that she has access, to the full extent of protections and mobilization that she can get is something that's worthwhile. Well, we sort of touched on it, but we wanted to close the show by talking a bit about Ukraine. Just because, Matt and I have, we did an episode about this back in January, right? With Mike Prisner. We've covered it. I've done it in my Griscom streams. Matt, I'm sure, has made his opinion clear on the majority report. But, we want to make sure that we're also dedicating a segment to this on the show. The difficult thing of doing a weekly show versus a daily show is that, we can't really do too much live reaction. But as of the recording, of about 20 minutes ago, it looks like Russian troops have captured a major city in southern Ukraine. The advance is moving around Kiev. They bombed a TV station tower, which is, attacking media centers is undoubtedly a war crime. There's a lot to cover. Maybe just to start out, just to be very clear, at this point, there are a lot of contexts and contingencies and things that are worth understanding that led to this moment. But at this point, this is Putin's war. It's an assault on international law and human rights, and we condemn it wholeheartedly. And complete solidarity with the Ukrainian people who have been caught in the crosshairs. This is even old numbers at this point, but we were, just a couple of days ago, is looking like we're already at around 750,000 people, 750,000 refugees from Ukraine. This is a human disaster and a truly, truly dark moment for a multitude of reasons.
Yeah, and I had a lot of opportunities to do live reaction as things change, and I don't know how much value that is anyway compared to like things where you get to stew on it a little bit and see how things played out. And like I do want to say, just to address, like, we were dismissive generally of the idea that Russia would invade with Mike Prisner. I also think that our emphasis on that show, which is the focus on like a split in anti-war, which is the sanctions versus no to war stuff, is the right emphasis to have made. And I think it's one that's still one bears repeating. So, and I agree with you. Like, this is sickening. And it is, and I think I understand like let's move on. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves a little bit.
No. And we'll talk about, because like we still maintain the position, going into that, and we'll get into this more later because I want to start on a different subject, but like still maintain the position that, decades and particular recent ratcheting it up of, American and NATO expansion have been very, very devastating to this. And this is not even, these aren't even positions that are solely held by the left. Right-wing military officials have warned that, continuing this expansion of NATO, for God's sakes, even Henry Kissinger, like the king of the ghouls, had noted, that this expansion could have unintended consequences, right?
Yeah.
So those are positions that are, completely maintained. And also, I will just say that, like, as we were hearing, just tall tale and lie, frankly, from the State Department, and from the United Kingdom government. I mean, do you remember when, Ukraine was apparently, there was an active coup operation going in? Boris Johnson released that. Nothing came of that. The false flag thing when we did the video debunking and investigating, the State Department official, right, who was just asserting without any evidence about these things. Like, if you believe that stuff, you are absolutely wrong too. Do you get what I mean? Like there's been so much misinformation out there that, like, I don't want to get fixated on it, because I think that there's a really kind of disgusting kind of tendency to, like, view these things outside of, as places to sort of score, points as to, like, who's the most prescient or whatnot, right?
Yeah.
But I do think that it's also very worthwhile noting that, like, the lesson here is not that, like, oh, well, there was too many people who were doubtful of information coming from the United States government, rather than, Putin ratcheted up. I mean, honestly, even the situation when we did our video with Mike Prisner was completely different from the situation when the invasion happened that week too, right? Like, situation on the ground changed, and it's important, as we are doing right now, to be able to update and react to things that are changing. But this kind of, like, I've been sitting here and I knew, back in December that, he was going to do it, I think is a completely absurd position to take as well. Right.
Well, it's not the game I'm playing. I'm not being a prognosticator. Like, I'm here for genuine, like, what is the moral and, like, ethical and political response to something. And like, so the U.S. State Department thing, like, right, like, so I think Russia, like that sort of, I don't know what sort of propaganda operations they've been doing to justify it. Like the anti-Nazi cleansing thing. Like,
oh yeah,
the problem is, like, with
bullshit.
the U.S. State Department was like, you have to trust us, and it's like, motherfucker, no, we don't do that. Like that's, like, it might be true, but you can't just say, like, what we say. And I maintain, and you were right, like, that is the right response still. Like, and this, and the weird thing about this Putin thing is it does add credibility to those sorts of folks, right? And that's why I think a lot of people are so surprised about it.
Well, a lot of people are, like, surprised.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I mean, and just to be really clear, in case people don't understand, when we're talking about government claims, the United Kingdom government said that there was a coup very likely to happen within the country. I mean, this was back in January. Within, it was either ongoing or going to happen within the next 2 days, right? And nothing materialized out of that, right? That is just straight, misinformation coming from Western intelligence, right? Like, you can't believe that shit. Like, I don't understand how anyone could retroactively been saying that, like, that was the correct thing to believe, right? Because it didn't happen, and it very clearly was trying to ratchet up tensions, because there are unfortunate, but true, and people should be able to wrestle and reckon with it. Interests that wanted to see this conflict get to a boiling point. I don't think the Western side, there were interests on the Western side that necessarily wanted to see a full-out invasion, but I could be wrong. Certainly, defense industry, things like that. But there were people who wanted to be able to use this as a way to sort of get other European countries, for example, to fall in line. If you need any examples of this, all you need to do is look at a little organization called the American Petroleum Institute, who has been having a fucking field day since this invasion started, saying, this is what we've been telling you all along. We need to drill. We need to expand our pipelines. We need to increase offshore drilling. The climate change is important, but security is much more important, right? There were interests that wanted to see an interruption, which still hasn't happened on a large scale yet, of Russian gas flowing westward, right? Because there is money to be made. And that is the dollars and cents reality of global capitalism, right? So there were people who wanted to see, for example, maybe Russia get isolated to a point where Germany started to say, oh, well, you know what? We're going to cancel contracts with Russia, which ended up happening, right? I don't think that it's fair or correct to say that that's the sole reason. At this point, there's conditions that led up to this, and understanding those is important. But at this point, it's undoubtedly Putin's war, right?
Yes, exactly.
I mean, he was the madman who called the tanks in at the end of the day. He's the madman who's talking about nuclear annihilation, right? There's no doubt about that. But I think what's really dangerous about this, and people have made this allusion too, that there's this kind of like post 9/11 mentality starting to creep up in America, where it's like any kind of conversation about how we got to this moment is, treasonous or dangerous. I mean, the White House Rapid Response Team is condemning the Democratic Socialists of America. We're seeing journalists getting, targeted. Like, we are seeing a kind of pretty extreme response right now. And I want to give the mic over to you, Matt, but we'll get into some of the examples of that in just a moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's the important thing, and I don't mind emphasizing over and over again. Like, no matter if you take the position that like George Soros has been pulling every string in Ukraine on behalf of the West, like this doesn't that even if that was true, it wouldn't justify this sort of invasion, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I think it's, and I think I do find like the idea that like Putin is ending a war here, like that seems just like a propaganda line from the Russian military, right? Like,
Oh yeah, I know.
that's offensive to a little bit.
I mean, the
Like,
denazification stuff is very much them learning
right,
from
like,
but they're learning from the American playbook, right? Where it's like you got to have like some humanitarian excuse that gets some group of people, rubes, frankly, but believing that. And I don't think that the denazification stuff is even targeted or really directed
domestic.
at English speaking audiences. I think that's, might be internal, but
Yeah.
they're learning that playbook as well. I mean, should we get into, I mean, we're going to keep coming back to these themes. So should we start getting through
Yeah.
some of these sounds and things?
Yeah.
I mean, we wanted to start first by acknowledging, the way that this whole conflict has been sort of portrayed in American media, and the pretty extreme at this point racist undertones. I believe it was the CBS reporter who was saying something along the lines of like, "Oh, it's so shocking to see, people who look like us, meaning white people, and people who drive cars like us, people from civilized countries, in war." I mean, that's incredibly nasty stuff, and unfortunately has not been isolated in a lot of the kind of reporting here, right? It's certainly notable that there is a war in Europe, right? But these aren't kind of like, just happenstance mistakes. I mean, that reveals a very, very clear thing in your ideology. If, your first reaction to these kind of things is say like, "Oh, these people have blonde hair and blue eyes, etc."
Yeah. I mean, what kind of news have we been getting if this is the sort of person who's been the foreign correspondent, right? Like who have they been in touch with in those communities? Where and it's an amazing like mix of like how like racism can erase. You literally have one person saying like this is like doctors and stuff, as if there's no
Mhm.
fucking doctors in Baghdad, right? Like because they're too brown. Like it really, and like that is the thing is like it's funny even when they know that they're speaking incorrectly, like I gotta be careful about this, but their perspective is limited from like the class of
Mhm.
people who get to do that job.
Yeah, it's truly amazing. And also, if like, it is always amazing where the borders of Europe start and stop too. I don't know if you look like historically, it is amazing sometimes that kind of white project of sort of understanding different nations as being European and quote unquote white. I don't know. It's a nasty project, but neither here nor there to really break all of that down. But that does get us into two other things that are really notable. One is maybe how to react to some news here, because like, I think it's important because this stuff is starting to become very much weaponized against the left. And we're talking about the DSA stuff and some of the targeting that we've been seeing from powerful people against socialists. And just people should be worried because whenever you see a kind of war fervor like we're experiencing right now, it is the left, who is targeted. You can go all the way back, to World War One. We all love Eugene Debs. I mean, why is he thrown in prison? He's thrown in prison for opposing the great imperialist war that was World War One. We don't even need to go that far back. Just look at the way that people were demonized, tarred and feathered in the media going into the Iraq War. So I want to be careful about how we talk about certain folks. But it is worth pushing back against some people who either because they're dumb as hell, or because they've decided that their position in this society is to be contrarian for contrarian's sake, who are actively trying to push Putin did nothing wrong line thing, is to be worried about the stuff that they're sort of promoting and their narratives, but not to do so in a way that sort of makes us blind to like realities. And what I'm talking about right now is some of those horrific videos of African, I believe Nigerian students in Ukraine being forcibly blocked from entering trains leaving the country. Those are actual events. I think that people should work to push against any kind of narrative that says like, oh, this proves the racist country deserved to be invaded. Bullshit, in the sense that like it doesn't reflect reality on the ground in the first place. Also bullshit reasoning on the second place too. Like we're just not going to support ground invasions for something like that anyway. But these things do exist, and they're nasty realities of what happens in conflict, right? And what you shouldn't do is try to lie or to sweep things under the rug, but to look at the unfortunate ugliness that pops up, along with the real humanity of people looking out for each other when you can see that, and things that happen in these tragic moments, right? Well, I think people need to be very, very careful, because there is a shitload of misinformation going on. But also, if anybody is telling you not to believe your eyes on something, you should also look at them with pretty extreme suspicion as well.
Yeah. Well, I have a quote to that effect. Folks might know that I am taking a vacation to Spain tomorrow. And so Orwell's been on the mind. This is an essay looking back on the war in Spain, I believe, or Spanish War. And this is a quote that I thought of a lot, like when people were talking about the disinformation under Trump and like, holy crap, everything's new and you can't trust anything. It's like, none of this is really new, but it gets particularly heated when there's killing going on. Here is this quote here. The struggle for power between the Spanish Republican parties is an unhappy, far-off thing which I have no wish to revive at this date. I only mention it in order to say, believe nothing or next to nothing of what you read about internal affairs on the government side. It is all from whatever source party propaganda, that is to say, lies. Orwell, by the way, was a propaganda, like a party propagandist for the British during World War II, so he knows a little bit about this. It is all from whatever source party propaganda, that is to say, lies. The broad truth about the war is simple enough. The Spanish bourgeoisie saw their chance of crushing the labor movement and took it, aided by the Nazis and by the forces of reaction all over the world. It is doubtful whether more than that will ever be established. Anyway, here's the relevant part. I remember saying once to Arthur Koestler, history stopped in 1936, at which he nodded in immediate understanding. We were both thinking of totalitarianism in general, but more particularly of the Spanish Civil War. Early in life, I have noticed that no event is ever correctly reported in a newspaper, but in Spain, for the first time, I saw newspaper reports which did not bear any relation to the facts, not even to the relationship which is implied in an ordinary lie. I saw great battles reported where there had been no fighting, and complete silence where hundreds of men had been killed. I saw troops who had fought bravely denounced as cowards and traitors, and others who had never seen a shot or fired hailed as heroes of imaginary victories. I saw newspapers in London retailing these lies, and eager intellectuals building emotional superstructures over events that had never happened. I saw, in fact, history being written not in terms of what happened, but what ought to have happened according to the various party lines. I think you kind of get the picture there, but that the full essay is, again, looking back on the Spanish War by George Orwell.
And we've been seeing this very clearly in the conflict, and obviously things get murky. But from like the Ghost of Kiev, story that was completely nonsensical, to the the Snake Island story, where basically they had said that the Russians had slaughtered 13 people who refused to surrender. I mean, that turned out not to be true at all. And recognize that there are these kind of stories that are getting propagated out there, and there are some people who are completely gung ho to sort of push narratives that are very, very far and unreflective of reality, and that you need to be careful with that. When you do have such a growing demand, for example, in America, particularly from the pundit class, I don't think this is really reflective of everyday people, but for one of the most insane euphemisms in political history, the no-fly zone. And it's very important to be careful about these things, because if you can paint a picture that is without any kind of nuance, you can start to convince people that we should do the inexcusable and the unthinkable, which would be sending American fighter jets over the airspace and engaging with Russian Air Force, right? Which is just a completely suicidal perspective to have, knowing at this point how mad Putin has gotten, and the real serious dangers of this conflict turning into a nuclear one. Again, I hope that Biden maintains his promise to avoid any kind of real entanglements, but you're seeing this kind of fervor from people, particularly people who commentate on politics for a living, to do something like this. And so it is very important to be questioning these kind of fantastical narratives that are coming out there, not in a kind of like excusing of an invading army or something like that, but to make sure that like we're dealing with what is actually happening instead of fantastical stories, because what is actually happening is bad enough and is a catastrophe enough on its own.
Yeah, did you see the Boris Johnson no-fly zone clip?
Oh, what did he say?
So there was a pretty, let's see if I can find it here. There was a pretty forceful questioning of like basically like by a Polish journalist. Oh, here it is. And he stands up to her, and this is in contrast to our Kier, who reportedly I saw
We'll get to that
fobbed her off
point in
to
a
a
minute.
spokesperson who then said no, we actually can't do that. So I do think like we gave Biden props. I want to give Boris props here too, because this was being shared as this like, look, this woman, go get her, right? And it is worrying to me. And good for, so far for these folks.
Ukrainian women and Ukrainian children are in deep fear because of bombs and missiles which are going from the sky. And Ukrainian people are desperately asking for the West to protect our sky. We are asking for the no-fly zone. We are saying in response that it will trigger World War III. But what is the alternative, Mr. Prime Minister? To observe how our children are, instead of planes, are protecting NATO from the missiles and bombs? What's the alternative for the no-fly zone? We have planes here, we have air defense system in Poland, in Romania. NATO has this air defense. At least this air defense could shield the Western Ukraine, so that these children with women could come to the border. It's impossible now to cross the border. There are 30 kilometers of lines. Imagine crossing the border with a baby or with 2 children. I'm so glad that Samantha Power is coming here to the border from the Polish side. Let her come to the border from Ukrainian side and see that. Britain guaranteed our security under Budapest Memorandum. So you're coming to Poland. You're not coming to Kiev, Prime Minister. You're not coming to Lviv. Because you are afraid. Because NATO is not willing to defend. Because NATO is afraid of the World War III. But it is already started. And these are Ukrainian children who are there taking the hit. You're talking about more sanctions, Prime Minister. But Roman Abramovich is not sanctioned. He's in London. His children are not in the bombardments. His children are there in London. Putin's children are in Netherlands, in Germany, in mansions. Where are all these mansions seized? I don't see that. I see that my family members, that my team members are saying that we are crying. We don't have where to run. Well, this is what is happening, Prime Minister.
Well, thank you very much for your questions, and thank you for getting here today. And I'm glad that you have been able to get here. And look, I just want to say that I'm acutely conscious that there is not enough that we can do as the UK government to help in the way that you want. And I've got to be honest about that. And when you talk about the no-fly zone, as I said to Volodymyr Zelensky, I think a couple of times, unfortunately, the implication of that is that the UK and would be engaged in shooting down Russian planes, would be engaged in direct combat with Russia. That's not something that we can do or that we've envisaged. And I think the consequences of that would be truly very, very difficult to control. What we can do is all the things that we are doing already, and providing as much help and support.
Yeah. So, I mean, I understand like the emotion is justified in the women's request, but I think that's the response that we have to get from leaders, and I'm glad that that's we've seen it.
Well, there's two notes. I mean, like, there's the fact is like this is a horrible tragedy, and
Yeah.
it's uncomfortable because you want to be able to provide the safety and security of people. I mean, who are caught up in this. Like there is a human. Like I can understand why people feel and would maybe like to see something like this, because and in the sense of like I want the conflict to stop. I want that too, right? But yeah, the general implications of American or British planes going in and firing on Russian on the Russian Air Force, I mean, would be absolutely disastrous, and that's the difficult bit. But the second bit that she does note, I think, is also really crucial, that there is a protection of a certain group of asset holders who, these are not just like pointing out like Roman Abramovich is not somebody who just has a very like, oh, he's just Russian. He's a Russian rich guy. I mean, this is somebody who's made his money in fossil fuels through very, very shady business dealings, very much with, the consent and probably private encouragement of Vladimir Putin, right? This is somebody who is close to Putin, who owns an incredible amount, not only the wealth that he's plundered from Russia, but now assets that he's holding in the United Kingdom, right? I saw earlier today, I think he's considering selling the soccer team, Chelsea. But like there has been notable, and a lot of people in the UK left have been making this point that, the London in particular, New York is up there as well, have become these kind of safe havens for these very, very wealthy people who get their wealth from, all billionaires' wealth is, from, dubious means, but from pretty exceptionally shady means, even for billionaires, right? London and New York, are these kind of havens where they park their money in financial packages and particularly real estate in those communities. And like, oh, why have those not been targeted, right? I think that is also a very, very fair point to make, and it's a shame, frankly, that Boris is able to sort of slide out of answering that question because that's one he can have an answer to and actually actively do something that would not lead to more immiseration of everyday people in Ukraine and around the globe.
Yeah. I don't disagree. I don't have anything to add to that, but I do. It is like that's the thing. Like it's hard to know what to emphasize with this because like I do look at like those Tories and like you hear about like their campaign finance stuff, and it's like, oh, they're bought, right? And that class of people is going to be like I mean, they're not going to be fine probably, but like I don't know.
No, I mean it's super worthwhile to note that, especially because when you see who's actually paying consequences and being targeted.
Right.
We're going to go and look at some of these other world leaders here, but I want to start in the UK because it's been extreme what's been going on there, to friends and comrades. So this is. They changed the title. This is a tweet I put out earlier. They changed the title, but this is how British media is using the crisis in Ukraine to attack workers' unions who are going on strike action. So in London, there has been a tube strike, their metro system. Workers have been on strike, and I believe it's going to go on maybe it's a 3-day strike. I can't remember exactly when it began. But this was in the Telegraph, right? Which prefers
horrible. Yeah, Telegraph is a horrible Tory establishment. I mean, there's a lot of Tory papers, but they're like,
but still, look at how this comes home, and look how, kind of feelings about atrocities abroad are sort of are brought against anti-war voices. Because if you look at the piece, there are people. I don't even want to give it the credence of reasonableness, but like it is worthwhile to point out that they're working from something. They're working that there are people within the union, leaders within the union, who are against war.
Right.
They're against war. And this headline here says the enemy underground, how Putin apologists brought London to a standstill, right? The implication here is that this is the activity of a foreign agent, not your neighbor, not the working class in your community. I mean, this is as nasty as a kind of red baiting thing as you can get. The piece as it exists today, they changed the name because there's so much outcry about it. I'm not going to fucking give Telegraph any money. I found other ways to read it. But if people saw they changed the names, to say how close is the RMT Union to Vladimir Putin's Russia, right? Which is still making an implication, though, it might not be as heavy-handed as before. I want to note again, the Labor Party, under the leadership of Keir Starmer, Slimy Keir, has been completely spineless. They have Keir, who has shown he finds his number one job as a leader of the Labour Party is to protect the interests of British capital, to destroy any of the kind of democratic reforms that were done within that party, and to fundamentally not just purge, but humiliate and isolate all people who were loyal to Jeremy Corbyn's vision of a democratic socialist future for working class people in the United Kingdom, right? He has laid the hammer down on members of the Labour Party, going so far as to say that they will remove the whip from people in the Labour Party who mention NATO, who mentioned the North Atlantic Treaty Organization that for 30 years now, right after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, has only continued to accelerate a situation that we're living in today of a very, very worrying moment of actual conflict between the West and Russia, right? Mentioning any of that history is now not allowed within the party of Labor, right? And it's been pretty shameful, I must say. I know I'm an American watching from abroad, but it has been pretty shameful, I must say, to see members who still remain in the Labour Party completely acquiesce to the demands and pressure of Keir Starmer, instead of doing what needed to have happened a long time ago, was to splinter away from that rotting carcass of a party. Because I'm going to tell you right now, they will never, ever allow a kind of radical human based politics to dominate within the Labour Party. We've seen MPs remove their names from anti-war statements, etc. I mean, truly a falling in line moment that should be worrying certainly to people in the United Kingdom, but to people all around.
Yeah, and that's why I'm super suspicious at all the folks who want to make the topic of conversation. How is the left responding to this, and what did they support, and when do they support it? Because we weren't asked about this, like the run up to any of this stuff. And I think like the only point of like having a fucking liberal democracy is for these moments where you can actually talk about these things widely and add context, and educate ourselves broadly against, because this is not like to say like Elliot Abrams and shit. Like I was looking back at like the Euromaidan protests, and Elliot Abrams was trying to get Obama to be more forceful. Is out there saying, "Come on, say something," and then Joe Biden comes out and says says something. But it's like, I don't want to empower those people. They're not going to solve anything, in my opinion. I think they're going to only make things worse. And I think that's to the extent that we control anything. Like I think that's what we need to stay trying to control.
And again, the call right now is we're going to go to a Jeremy Corbyn video in just a moment, but the call right now is to skip the bloodshed and get to the negotiating table on this. And that is what the demand must be. And yeah, these things truly matter. And like recognizing that NATO is not only just a way for America to sort of express imperial eastward expansion and imperial ambition, but it is also an incredible source of revenue for the military industrial complex in this country. And I'll say one thing that has been pretty surprising, I guess it shouldn't have been surprising, but disappointing, was to see how many liberals, like, who might not be all the way on, general anti-imperialism, they still think, America should bomb some countries sometimes. But they use terms like military industrial complex. How quickly the understanding of what that role plays in American foreign policy disappears. We're going to go through a kind of rundown of what some leaders who we really respect have to say about this. But while we're on the subject, I did want to share and read the DSA statement, because we're looking at what's happening within the Labor Party, and the Democratic Socialists of America have been targeted domestically as well. They put out a statement that I agree with, and I think was very strong. I'll read the whole thing here because it's not that long, and the response to this has been pretty exceptional. But this is the official statement from the DSA on Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The DSA condemns Russia's invasion of Ukraine and demands immediate diplomacy and de-escalation to resolve this crisis. We stand in solidarity with the working classes of Ukraine and Russia, who will undoubtedly bear the brunt of this war, and with anti-war protesters in both countries and around the world who are calling for diplomatic resolution. This extreme and asymmetrical escalation is an illegal act under the United Nations Charter and severely threatens the livelihoods and well-being of working class people in Ukraine, Russia, and across the region. We urge an immediate ceasefire and the total withdrawal of Russian forces from Ukraine. There is no solution through war or further intervention. This crisis requires an immediate international anti-war response, demanding de-escalation, international cooperation, and opposition to unilateral coercive measures, militarization, and other forms of economic and military brinkmanship. DSA reaffirms our call for the United States to withdraw from NATO and to end the imperialist expansionism that set the stage for this conflict. We call on anti-war activists in the United States and across the world to oppose violent escalations, demand a lasting diplomatic solution, and stress the crucial need to accept any and all refugees resulting from this crisis. Much of the next 10 years are coming into view through this attack. While the failure of the neoliberal order are clear to everyone, the ruling class is trying to build a new world through a dystopic transition grounded in militarism, imperialism, and war. Socialists have a duty to build an alternative. No war but class war, which I think is as principled of a statement as you can make. It's very severe in its consequences, in its condemnation of Russia's actions, but it also recognizes a position that is not unique to just some people. I hate the accusation that's like, oh, this is a kind of being anti-NATO, some kind of fringe online position. This is a position of pretty much every people's movement across the globe, from Brazil to Bolivia to much of the Western European left, that NATO has been a unnecessary and extremely dangerous cash grab for American weapons manufacturers. It has been a way to sort of impose, and expand Western power eastward, right? None of that excuses Putin's decision, and the real irony, tragedy, however you want to say it, of what Putin has done is it probably only is going to bolster support for NATO, which seemed like it was on its back legs, before this. But undoubtedly, NATO is going to come back with more fervor as more and more people think mistakenly that this, alliance, is a force for good. But just because that might be the case, yeah.
NATO's going to be all right, even if left podcasters are taking cracks at it, and the strategy, how sound it is. They'll be fine.
But it's still an extremely dangerous alliance that has sort of created, it's worked to create the conditions that it says it's working to oppose, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And beyond this, we're going to go to these other speakers in just a second. But I just wanted to note that what we've seen in response to this should worry everyone, because there has been a demand that, again, this is not some Looney Tunes statement recognizing and supporting, for example, Putin's invasion and occupation and recognition of of Eastern Ukraine. Right. This is not a statement that is coming out in support of, the madness of this conflict. This is a statement that says this conflict should stop, that we need to pursue diplomacy, right? Which should always be an option. That is how wars end. Right. And also, the militaristic Western American imperialist organization that has played a role in rationing up conflict, not just in Ukraine, but across Eastern Europe, and not just in a kind of symbolic way, all the way up to hot wars in the 90s, has not played a role, in promoting peace, but rather has created a rivalry, a military rivalry between, Russia and the rest of the world. right? Because when the Russians were interested in maybe participating, so that effectively the need for NATO to be an adversarial military alliance, the West wasn't interested, right? So, let that be that, but also know that the White House has come at them at the DSA, right, which should worry you. Extremely powerful media figures have come at them, right? And there is a demand for many, many people, particularly amongst, the more wealthy-leaning liberal class in this country, that are saying that any kind of standing out of line with the very specific American line on this thing, reaches the level of, if treason at worst, if nothing else, a severe disloyalty to one's own country, right? And that's the kind of rhetoric that you should be very worried about, because these things happen quickly, and they happen brutally when it comes to attacking and shutting down dissent from the left.
Yeah. And I think the World War I example, like, I don't know how that isn't the guide at this point. Like, and look, if Putin keeps on like a Hitlerian march and starts like getting into NATO countries, like, I think that changes the conversation too, and then we can talk about that. But that's not where we're at now. And I think that I applaud that DSA statement. I think that was really well emphasized.
Yeah. Well, let's get to these. And I know we've been going long, but I think this is worth Matt and I spending time to go through these, because we don't get to do shows every day to sort of react to things. I want to start with something that is, I think, first and foremost the direct thing that we need to start to be talking about, worrying about, is this refugee crisis, and finding ways to be humane about this. In the United States, we should absolutely open up the country to refugees of Ukraine, and frankly of all countries, and to provide them the status that is necessary for them to either maintain life here while conditions in their own country is unbearable for them, and also create paths so that they can settle here permanently if they so desire. Here's AOC, I think, actually making this argument very well, with Rachel Maddow, who has played a very bad role, by the way, in rationing up all of this shit. But we'll
about those politics.
We can ignore that for now.
Yeah.
Rachel, I'm not going to play all of Rachel's question, but effectively she is asking AOC what she thinks about a coming refugee crisis from Ukraine.
About the inevitable demonization of those victimized people.
Absolutely. Well, first and foremost, I think the world is watching, and many immigrants and refugees are watching. And how the world treats Ukraine should be, and Ukrainian refugees, should be how we are treating all refugees in the United States. I mean, especially when you look at such stark juxtapositions where so many of the factors are in common with Syria, for example. The way the world treated Syrian refugees versus the way that the world is greeting Ukrainian refugees is a very stark contrast. And I think that the way that we are looking at immediate granting of TPS to Ukrainian refugees, which is what we need to be doing, as well as many others, is something that we really need to keep in mind. Because I do believe that, for example, the thousands of people who tried to seek legal refuge on our southern border, how Haitian refugees have been treated by the United States, not just in past administrations, but frankly this one, is not right. And we really need to make sure that when we talk about accepting refugees, that we are meaning it for everybody, no matter where you come from. But I do believe that this also presents a profound opportunity because of the amount of extraordinary support for Ukraine and Ukrainian refugees. If we grant TPS to Ukrainian refugees, this is also an opportunity to finally create a path to citizenship for TPS recipients. A lot of people don't know that TPS recipients, by and large, do not really have a concrete path to citizenship. Many have been here for decades. So I think that this is also, while there is a risk, there's also a profound opportunity for us to make the crooked path straight on this issue.
Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez.
Excuse me. I think that's a phenomenal response, right? It's that we need to be accepting refugees from this war immediately, and that you see in moments like this how quickly and efficiently the American state and bureaucracy can work on certain things. And you realize that no, it is actually a choice. It's not complicated. In the sense of, we can't figure out all of the, the specific rules and regulations that we need, to recognize and bring in people from Haiti when they're fleeing situations that we played a very active role in creating, right? We can act in ways quite broadly. You can also look at the amount of money that we've, been sending over into Ukraine, which I think is generally fine. I'd prefer, less weapons and things like that. But, you can see the amount of money that, is Congress is very quick to be able to send over. And you realize that the kind of funding failures that we see in this country, again, are, by choice. And I think AOC makes a good point there.
Yeah, I mean, just to contrast with the Haiti stuff is just unbelievable. And it's obscene.
Should we go to Corbyn or Lula first for our
Let's go to Jeremy.
Tour? Let's go to Jeremy. Jeremy Corbyn, I think, has the line on this. This is we're just going to play the first, I think, minute or two from this. You can find the whole thing at Double Down News, I believe, which is a UK outfit. Very, very good. This is the first work of theirs that I've seen, but I think this was an incredible video. You can also read the full text of this in Jacobin. It's their most recent piece attributed to Jeremy Corbyn. But this is Jeremy Corbyn, I think, truly outlining, and we should just let this play for a couple minutes, because I think Jeremy Corbyn truly outlines what the left's response to this crisis should be. A human-centered, pro-peace approach.
I'm horrified at the war in Ukraine, horrified at the loss of life, horrified at the bombardment, and horrified at the future. The Ukrainian people are now going through an absolute hell. They're frightened of what may happen. Bombardment from the air and the arrival of tanks and other forces is terrifying. My thoughts are with the people of Ukraine. They deserve and should be able to live in peace in the future, as should the peoples of every other country of the world. We have to apply political pressure on Russia and support the public pressure that's there in Russia to end this war and to withdraw those Russian forces. And we should go back to the original agreements relating to Ukraine that were made in Budapest and the later Minsk agreement, which was designed to bring about a long-term ceasefire. All wars end with a political solution. All wars end with dialogue. Why don't we cut out the fighting zone and go straight into the talking zone? It's very easy for a politician in any parliament in the West to get up and say, go to war, go to war, go to war. It's always easy to vote for somebody else's children to go to war and die. When a war takes place, there's always a desire by the opposing sides to make sure it's only their line and their story that gets out. And so it's truth that is the first casualty in the fog of war. Keir Starmer claims that the Stop the War Coalition is a Russian stooge. There is no evidence anywhere they've done anything other than stand up for peace around the world. In my own case, there's a record going back as long as your arm, both in the Soviet Union and in post-Soviet Russia, because human rights and solidarity are universal, irrespective of the convenience or inconvenience of the time. I get accused of being pro-Russian and pro-Putin. I'm pro-human rights, actually. That's my position. Putin was promoted into office with the support of Tony Blair and some other Western leaders, and he was welcomed in the West, state visit to Britain. At that very time, the Chechen war was going on. The appalling loss of life of Chechen people and of Russian people, the abuse of the human rights of the Chechen people, the racism towards Chechens in Moscow and other cities was palpable. I was part of a delegation to Moscow with the Parliamentary Human Rights.
I mean, it's a 7-minute long video. It's just, pure facts throughout. And I also do think it's very worthwhile for Americans to look what's going on in the UK, particularly with the Labour Party, because it's a very, very worrying chapter. Yeah,
it's horrible. And what he said at the start about all wars end with dialogue is just a simple statement of fact. And the experience that the UK has had with the IRA is a testament to that. You gotta talk.
Something where they're
I fully can accept that maybe Putin's the one who doesn't want to talk at this moment, but you got to remain the person, you got to remain wanting to talk.
Exactly. And thinking that further, actual military escalation here is going to bring that closer is completely
Yeah.
delusional and is actually antithetical, to any kind of values of wanting for, an end to this conflict and the suffering of people. Because, it's worrying to see, what could end up happening over the next, few weeks, particularly if the Russian lines are sort of slowed, and they just resort to just brutal shelling of cities, right? Like this conflict could, be going on for a long while and have very, very serious human casualties, which is why we should try to off ramp the conflict as soon as possible and with every, diplomatic capability that we have to pursue. I wanted to bring up just particularly too, because I know Michael would have as well, Lula's line on this, which I think is, you'll see a lot of similarities here between Corbyn and and Lula. I'm sorry, y'all. It's in Portuguese. There are subtitles for people watching, but if you're listening, you'll just have to listen to the passion of Lula's voice and trust that is the truth.
É lamentável que na segunda década do século XXI a gente tenha países tentando resolver suas divergências, seja territoriais, políticas ou comerciais, através de bombas, através de tiros, através de ataques, quando deveria ter sido resolvido, sabe, numa mesa de negociação. Ninguém pode concordar com guerra, ninguém pode concordar com ataques militares de um país sobre o outro, e a gente está acostumado a ver que as potências de vez em quando faz isso sem pedir licença. Foi assim que os Estados Unidos invadiu o Afeganistão, invadiu o Iraque sem pedir licença para ninguém, foi lá e invadiu. Foi assim que a França e a Inglaterra invadiram a Líbia. E é assim que a Rússia está fazendo com a Ucrânia. É importante que essas pessoas aprendam que a guerra não leva a nada a não ser a destruição, a não ser mais desemprego, mais desespero, mais fome. O ser humano tem que criar juízo e resolver as suas divergências numa mesa de negociação, nunca num campo de batalha. É lamentável que na segunda...
Sorry.
Lula, go away, buddy. Not joking.
No, I mean, I think that's another, strong statement as well, recognizing, that dialogue is the only way out of these things.
And yet, I don't think it's I reject the idea that it's apologizing for Putin to bring up U.S. actions in this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was when at like 3 or whatever in the morning here, when the invasion was like fully, when I first caught up with the invasion, the idea, like what it reminded me of was like I looked at on YouTube a live stream of grainy footage of Kiev, and it reminded me of the night vision footage of Shakana Baghdad.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a very formative experience in my life. I was like, I didn't reject it. I wasn't an anti-war activist from that point forward, but it wasn't what I was expecting from what George Bush and all the like sort of like people I had been like led me to believe about what we were going to do there. Right. That looked like a community. Like it looked like a town bigger than one I'd been to. That was people there. And when I saw like the traffic hit the streets in Kiev, like, I mean, I'm getting a little bit distracted, getting a little bit off track, but it was the same sort of crime. And I think we can only, like, I don't feel comfortable not putting those in the same context.
I mean, I think you're 100% right. I mean, like, and the reason I think this is so shocking to the world is that, like, it was only supposed to be America that could do that.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not saying that that's what I believe as morally just, but like, there was supposed to be a kind of global understanding that America was the one that could go and invade other countries. And now Russia is trying to play the role. That doesn't excuse or justify what Putin is doing. It's monstrous, just like it was monstrous when the Americans were doing it, which is why we should be advocating for, a diplomatic solution rather than, plunging the world into even more war, which is what exactly would happen if more actors get involved militarily on the ground.
Yeah. And, it's a point of curiosity I want to look up, but like this whole thing where it's like, this is causing nuclear anxiety. Is it just causing it? Like, was that also, how do we know as Americans that that wasn't what the world was feeling in the lead up to the Iraq war and that sort of stuff, right? Like, we are at a nuclear power. We're doing stuff we shouldn't be doing. Like, like now we have this anxiety, and I share it. Like this,
Mhm.
I fucking hate thinking about nuclear war, right? But like I don't know, like instead of feeling like the patriotism, the post 9/11 like bloodlust, probably a lot of people felt like, oh shit, are we gonna get fucking bombed?
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, I mean, we can truly only just advocate and hope that, you know, we can really seriously pursue these negotiations. I mean, you've seen sort of flickers of it. At this point, what Putin's demanding, I think, is a complete non-starter. I mean, he's effectively just been demanding the complete resignation of the Ukrainian government, right? Um, but as Matt was saying earlier, it's like we have to be able to create the conditions where there are people who can pick up the call, and continue to support the anti-war movement, both within your own country, but also to show solidarity with the thousands upon thousands of Russians, who have bravely stood up, against a system that you cannot call by any stretch of the imagination to be democratic, or a system that really privileges, civil rights. Um, and it's a tragic moment. Like, I think we, we could, like, there's so many more things. I mean, like, just to mention, I mean, obviously the nuclear question comes up. I mean, there's a worry that, like, even if this conflict gets resolved, that it only ratchets up the desire of, smaller, medium-sized countries to nuclearize, because it seems to be over and over that really is the only way to prevent uh, intervention, which I think is a tragedy for the human race, to see another rise in nuclear, nuclear capacity buildup, and that starts, is a long history. But that was one thing that was so devastating about Trump, was pulling out of our agreements. People need to remember that too, as a part of the context here. On top of NATO, that America under Trump pulls out of the disarmament agreements, right? Like, that is a worrying development. And you can say, well, Trump was an anomaly or whatever. But at a certain point, if America is electing people who are pulling us out of basic kind of, agreements to lower the stockpile of nuclear weapons, that's a worrying escalation of, of a crisis, right? We weren't able to talk about, the fact that Germany is now going to expand and re-up their military budget. Remember that NATO, in addition to sort of being an alliance that was set up, to impose, one, to combat the Soviet Union, and then post-Soviet Union to sort of project power eastward. The second bit was to prevent Germany, after World War II, re-upping and rearming its military. Right. I mean, this was a big part of it, was to secure a world where, Germany wasn't going to have a large military. I mean, that paradigm looks like it's completely over. We'll see what that means, for example, within Europe. If Europe, starts to pursue their own kind of, increase across the board in a kind of, EU European army, right? I mean, like, there are a lot of big questions. Like, this is a moment that has changed the political and particularly the IR dynamic, frankly, forever. And I just want to just say, like, on a human level, and I know I've been talking, so I want to throw it over to you, Matt, but I just want to say on a human level, because, like, it's very easy to feel flippant, or to get flippant, particularly online, about these things, right? Because these are issues that touch us deeply, and they rightfully should worry you, right? And they should hurt your heart and your soul when you see these images and you imagine what people are going through. And I think it's worthwhile to remember, at least on our side, that we're all feeling this, right? Like, I don't want to see this escalation continue. I think that this is an absolutely disgusting moment. What we're advocating for here is not ignoring the tragedy or the crisis, but a recognition that, as bad as this is right now, it can get worse, right? It got worse, and it can get way worse. And what we can do is try to advocate for a future that does not, pursue the worst possible option on the table right now. That is really the only sane and humane position to take. And that's the anti-war and pro-human and pro-diplomacy position. We're all feeling this kind of crisis. And, like, again, I understand, like, the feeling of, like, we want the heroes to come in and to sort of eradicate, these things. But the world is much more complicated than this kind of Marvel movie picture of what conflict it is. And I just truly want to express the deep sorrow that I'm feeling watching this, and also the kind of frustration that I have when people think that because you're not advocating for an American military bombing campaign or escalation of this conflict, that you're somehow, not caring about the actual human suffering that's going on. We're advocating for this shit to end. And the unfortunate thing is that there's not just this kind of clear path and to necessarily do it, right? That you can just flip a switch, right? Diplomacy is difficult. De-escalation is difficult. But it is a much less harmful and better for the human race than any kind of militaristic adventures that I see some people advocating for.
Yeah, and just to kind of wrap up, I got a section. I wanted to see how the right was digesting this. Stephen Crowder says, "Don't defend NATO because they spend too much on healthcare." So I think we can skip that one. But here is this guy Frederick Kagan on Jordan Peterson's show, and I generally wasn't.
I forgot about this.
I was curious what Jordan would come down, but this is a section toward the end where he talks about the ramifications.
No one is going to talk about a ground invasion of Belarus or Russia or Kaliningrad or anything. I am confident that NATO will act, if it acts militarily at all, in an entirely defensive fashion and simply for the purpose of eliminating known imminent threats of attack to member states. But no one is going to talk about an invasion, and we're not going to do that. But we are going to have to change our force posture very fundamentally, which is going to have all kinds of ripple effects, because this is not a short-term crisis. The threat that Putin is manifesting is a threat that's going to be here as long as Putin is here. So we're going to have to be prepared to defend Poland and Romania and the Baltic states from the Russian conventional threat. For the first time since the end of the Cold War, we're going to have to be prepared to defend against the risk of a Russian mechanized attack on NATO member states. The US defense budget is not built to do that. The US force posture is not structured to do that. Our national security documents are not built to do that. We're going to have to change all of that. And we're going to have to rebuild some defense capability, and we're going to have to spend more on defense because China hasn't gone away. We've spent more than 90 minutes here talking about Russia. We haven't talked about China, which is great because I'm not a China expert.
Yeah, that's
little Jordan pumping up at the end. No, I mean, from that, go off, Matt. But from that, there are going to be a lot of advocates wanting to increase American military spending, as there are the nasty freaks who are, trying to drive the world to another kind of existential cliff, which is climate change, saying that the solution to this is to increase American oil manufacturing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have much to add to it other than that's what they're getting, which is raise budgets. I think there was another time he mentioned that, and I think there's going to be enough gas in that tank that you don't need the left to join that chorus itself, and I think it's probably best for the world that they don't.
Well, and I'll tell you what's coming next is that the Republicans are going to start shifting their tune on the conflict.
Oh yeah, did you see the Tucker? There's a Daily Show sort of mashup where it contrasted the week prior and then the new live.
Oh yeah, are they moving? Biden's week.
They have moved.
Yeah. And that should be also something that people in the U.S. start to consider much more seriously domestically, because that's coming as well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I mean, again, these are really dark times, and it's nice to be able to speak to y'all and have community here. Please consider joining up with us for the second half of the show on patreon.com/leftreckoning. We'll be doing a little preview of the here we go. Here's our number. You can leave us a voicemail that we only play in the post game. So, get that in there. We'll be doing a little bit of a preview, watching some ads from Abbott and Beto or Robert O'Rourke. And much more on the other side.
I'll be talking about the baseball strike too. I found a new ESPN writer who what do we think of an opposite of a bum steer? No,
we should think of something.
I've literally said this. You could probably make a compilation of the amount of times I've asked for what the opposite but this guy gets it. I don't even remember his name. He's the most recent person I follow, but he has a fucking column on this owner's shenanigans that is just exactly what I would want to see from like fucking Jacobin on it. At least what I read so far. So patreon.com/leftreckoning to catch us in the post game.
All right. See y'all soon.
See you, folks.